Hello guys, it's Chamas and we're returning to the Beyblade discussion. This time on why Metal Fight Beyblade 4D was peak. At least relative to Metal Fight itself. So for this video, I mainly want to talk about the actual functions of these bays, meaning I'm not going as in-depth with the physical design itself, so faces and clear wheels are probably going to be largely ignored. For tracks and bottoms, I'll probably mention new ones a bit more, but for reused parts, I'm probably just going to gloss over them. But for actual metal wheels, these are kind of the main things, and I guess also 4D drives as well, so that'll probably be the bulk of the video. And as a side note, I'm only doing 4D system bays. I know that there's technically some other things that were released during 4D, but I'm just sticking to the 4D system itself. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started with the bay on the screen here, Big Bang Pegasus. So Big Bang Pegasus was a really good starting bay for the line. I actually think this might be the best starting bay to any line in Beyblade history. It really introduces the entire system really well. Now the face is just kind of a face, but the clear wheel, this is something at least worth noting I think about clear wheels in 4D, but they have these little like flakes inside of them. It's hard to see, but you kind of see like a little bit of glitter. The whole thing with this is that it was supposed to add weight. I feel like most people who weren't around during 4D probably don't even know about this, and even if you were, you probably forgot about it. It was something that they marketed when 4D was first coming out and how this was supposed to add weight to clear wheels, which again, it's a bit debatable, but at least worth noting for a video like this, I think. They also had a good decision here with actually introducing the first ever 4D drive with the first ever bay. Now, MacLeod did release alongside Big Bang Pegasus, so you could still see regular tracks and bottoms in the line, it just wasn't on the main bay. But yeah, introducing 4D drives, really good idea. Of course, final drive being iconic. I mean, it starts off in kind of this like semi-flat type of shape, and then kind of goes down to like this rubber flat-ish shape, which is pretty cool. Works as you'd want it to, and was the first ever mid-battle mode change bottom in Metal Fight. And for the 4D wheel, they did a good job here as well. So you actually had 3 pieces for this wheel, which again, does work really well. The reason being is because most bays only have 2. There were 2 bays that had cores and PC frames, and in that case cores were pretty much just metal wheels with small extra plastic pieces, but most bays had cores and metal frames, which was effectively just a 2-part metal wheel. And then you only had 2 bays, this and Fusion Hades, that had all 3. So with this you could see that the core of Big Bang just had kind of these extra protrusions on it, nothing too crazy really. The metal frame was kind of the bulk of the metal wheel, so you had a couple different orientations. Of course you had this one, which kind of just stuck out here in front of these parts, which is pretty interesting, and then the other one where, by moving it back a bit, you could change up the mode, if I could get it correctly. There we go. It kind of pairs here, which means this part is more exposed, and this part's just kind of there. It's a really interesting idea, but it does work. Personally, I always used this kind of mode, but afterwards you could add in the PC frame in a couple different orientations. You had one like this, which keeps the contact points open, and then the other one, which is a bit back, and that one kind of subdues the contact point. It is still there, I mean there is still metal, but it does partially block it off, which is pretty cool. But yeah, Big Bang Pegasus, you do get quite a bit out of it. You have 4 different orientations on the metal wheel, which is really cool. Introduce 4D drives, great starting bay. I'm probably not going to spend this much time in every bay, but as it did introduce the line, I figured I should, so works very well and was very cool. Alongside it, we had MacLeod get released, so for this one, you did have a reused track here with 130, which solid middle height track. And also the new bottom wave-wide defense, which is a really strange part. I don't know why it's like that, but sure, why not? Nothing really of note, but of course the metal wheel is pretty interesting. So how Fang works, in its more defensive mode, you can see how all of these parts kind of are sloped, going down like this to some extent. It's pretty slight, but still works as just kind of a nice, bulky defense type. However, you can actually flip the core and frame, well I guess just the frame, but flipping the metal frame, putting it back on the core. Now it's different, because these parts now kind of slope upward a bit, so they're kind of offset, and you can see how it kind of gives a more dynamic contact point on these 3 parts here, which is pretty cool. Acts as a really interesting counter mode. Really good way to change up the bay, actually. Adds a lot to the metal wheel. But yeah, pairing Fang Leon with Big Bang Pegasus was a great move, and does help to introduce the 4D system very, very well. El Drago Destroy has to be one of the strangest introductions ever. For context, El Drago Destroy is the metal wheel itself. It has a 2-part metal wheel slash just 2-part wheel. This is not El Drago 3, this is not Destroy, they are just El Drago Destroy as one entity. It's a weird descriptor, but whatever. You also have Final Survive, which is the inverse of Final Drive, though to a different extent. So it starts off in its attack form, which is more just like a large hole flat, which is cool. Then you get an actual sharp here, so less aggressive than Final Drive overall, having an actual kind of stamina mode, but still a similar enough concept. And of course, El Drago Destroy does have a mode change. You have kind of the more absorb-oriented mode here, where these parts are a little bit blocked off by the rubber, and yeah, the rubber is just more exposed, but by shifting this to the other side, the rubber is more so underneath now, and with that you then have proper upper contact points, which is pretty cool. And then yeah, just some plastic sticking out here, so it does function more with its upper attack, although I know the main combo is a little bit questionable with that, as people usually complain about this thing being too tall and whatnot, but again, conceptually speaking, it is still pretty cool and works well enough, I'd say. I do like this bit quite a bit. Beat Links isn't quite as interesting, but it's still pretty cool. Wide defense is used here, which just kind of exists, honestly. But Triple Height 170 is actually a lot cooler because not only is it a unique height, but all 3 of its heights are actually unique to this track in particular. Also, this sounds weird, but it's actually the only new track in 4D in general, which is kind of insane, but that's just how it is. So its function is basically just kind of twist it and then 170, 195, and then 220, so pretty cool. The beat wheel itself is a lot more simplistic, being one of 2 4D metal wheels like this, where it's just the core and PC frame, and again, the core you can tell is basically just a metal wheel on its own. It looks like one, but the PC frame does change its functions up a little bit. So first you have this version where these kind of notches do act as contact points, but by moving the PC frame like this, while again, like on Big Bang, they're still there, they are at least fairly restricted, I would say. But yeah, nothing too crazy, but still a pretty solid release overall. After this, we have Scythe Chronos, which is actually the other bay that's just a core and PC frame. Scythe Chronos does reuse T125, which is fine. Solid stamina track, I guess. You also have Eternal Defense Sharp, which is not a bottom I'd expect to have exist, but it does. So you do have some kind of free spin on the bottom here. It's a pretty unique shape. Definitely a unique part in 4D, but there really isn't much else to say on it. Now, Scythe itself is where the interesting stuff actually happens. So there are 2 modes to these PC frame parts here, and so basically you could flip it over and like this, it is stationary. These parts are just locked in place and just kind of these extra plastic contact points that aren't really going to do a whole lot, but they do exist. Might be a little bit disruptive, honestly, especially on a stand type. However, you can flip them to how I had them initially, and now these parts, of course, do free spin, which is a little hard to see like that. There we go. So these parts will free spin, which is definitely more effective for a bay like this. This is definitely a better use of a PC frame, in my opinion, and it's the last time we're actually going to see one for quite a while in this video. But again, definitely a solid use of it. Very Aries is another really, really iconic bay from Metal Fight because of how it works. Of course, the wheel here is just that, a wheel. The clear wheel and metal wheel are fully combined, and unlike El Drago Destroy, it's not divided in any form, it just is that. Additionally, it's also LR, which is even more interesting, but it also has another function. When you launch it, these yellow parts are inside, which gives it stronger attacks here, but as it loses spin, they come out, which is supposed to help sort of give some extra defense for the bay, which is cool, I guess, but underneath you also have Delta Drive, which gives you a few manual mode changes. For the modes, they are based on previous bottoms, but yeah, you have, of course, Wide Ball as the one I have it set in right now, but you could flip it to flat or sharp, which is pretty cool, but yeah. Set it back to wide ball, and there we go. That is very Aries. It's a pretty cool bay. They kind of marketed this thing as having 12 modes, which I would debate because LR plus Delta Drive is 6, but saying that these are their own modes, I'm a little unsure of. I'm not sure I agree with that at all. I guess it's a mid-battle change as a mode, but if you can actually choose the position of these, then it's different, or I guess even just have it to where it can shift modes or just be locked to one, but yeah, it's a little bit odd, but still really, really cool bay. J Jupiter is another favorite of mine. Big fan of how this one works. So first up, for the track here, you do have S130, which is a fine choice. Solid defense track. I think they could have used GB145 here. Would have worked well with the theme of the actual Metal Wheel, but it is kind of an awkward track, so I can understand wanting to just use something a bit more solid. You also get Rubber Ball here, which is pretty cool. Was the part we needed in Metal Fights, and they released it here, so that works. And of course, the Metal Wheel does have a pretty cool function. The metal frame itself has these 4 metal balls that all move around, and the core, you can kind of choose how they work, so in this mode you can see they all move around, but we can also flip it to the other side here, which locks them to the middle here, which is really interesting actually. I think it was a fairly clever gimmick to incorporate in a bay like this, and yeah, it works really well. Not really much else to say on it, just a solid gimmick that functions. Next up, we have Blitz Unicorno. So Blitz Unicorno is a bit odd, so we do have 100 RSF on this thing, which is really boring. It's just Ray Gill's parts. Really wish they would have went a little further on trying to make these parts actually interesting, but I do think the Metal Wheel actually does at least get some points for this thing. So Blitz is pretty cool. You have these kind of 3 segments on each of the blades, and you kind of offset this basically by changing the mode here. We have that, or you can offset it to where it's basically 2 segments on these 3 metal blades, but then you have these kind of extra parts just, again, offset, so you have more of a barrage mode rather than the kind of stronger assault mode, which is pretty cool. Nothing too fancy, but definitely a solid way to change up the Metal Wheel. So while I do find this bay to be fairly underwhelming, honestly one of the few real blemishes on 4D, because it should have just been more interesting considering the motif, but at least the Metal Wheel is pretty cool. On the other hand, we have Phantom Orion. This thing actually does a lot. So first up, the 4D drive in this one has nothing to do with any kind of mode change, unlike everything else. Instead, you just have this really good shape for a stamina bottom, combined with a bearing, and yeah, this thing of course is just great because of that. And the Metal Wheel is also really cool because it has kind of this weight distribution idea, and I mean this in 2 different ways. So first up here, looking at the metal frame, you're going to notice that there's kind of a seam here, which is like the midsection of the frame, and it's actually offset. It's not the exact same on each side. So depending on which way you have this flipped can impact kind of the weight distribution and where the center of gravity is, whether it's kind of a bit higher or a bit lower, which I find to be very, very cool. It's definitely not a flashy gimmick, but I think it just works really well, and again, it's just interesting. Also, the core here is not metal, it's actually plastic, which again is really interesting. And this is kind of the other weight distribution aspect of the bay, as having a plastic inside with all of the metal being outside means that this thing has great outward weight distribution, which is pretty important for stamina types to have, so this thing takes it to the extreme by allowing it to have entire just outward weight distribution. But yeah, the overall concept for this bay is just really, really cool. For sure one of my favorites. And yeah, it just works well as a really interesting stamina type. Next is Death Quetzalcoatl, which I guess in terms of parts here you have 125 solid mid-profile track. And then rubber defense flat for whatever reason. You have this kind of flat rubber part here. More on the outside, this kind of plastic guard that kind of comes up a bit, which is fine. Nothing too crazy. I know it's a good part, but in terms of conceptual design, it's there. It's kind of unique like EDS, but nothing else really for me to get into. Now, Death has a bit more going for it. So you have these kind of wave-like patterns on the core and also the metal frame, which does have an interesting alignment. So you have kind of the defense mode where these things actually just pair together. If I could get that correctly, that'd be helpful. There we go. So it's a pretty solid metal wheel like this, but you can also offset this by putting it up here, and now you have these weird gaps, and the waves are both kind of in the same direction, just layered on top of one another. So you have these gaps in here. Upper part just has kind of waves up here. It's a really interesting metal wheel. I like how it's designed. It's sort of similar thing, though it does have its own unique identity, so it still works pretty well as its own design, I would say. And yeah, it's just a really, really solid 4D release. Works well. And next, we have the Ultimate DX set, these 3 bays. They are interesting. Now, 2 of these are kind of just retools, Wing Pegasus and El Drago Guardian. The motifs are just retools of Big Bang Pegasus and El Drago Destroy, so that's not as interesting, but they do have their own identities to them, so I guess we can start going over those. But yeah, Wing Pegasus. For this one, you have 90 WF, which doesn't really matter too much. It's just there. That's all there really is to it. But Wing does have some different stuff. So on the core, you can kind of see these numbers here. It just kind of describes how much these stick out opposed to one another. This one's a bit more consistent on 0, but then you have 1 and 2, which kind of just offsets these parts here a bit more, which, I mean, it works. It's nothing crazy, but it's a fine idea. I don't mind it. Sure. Now, for El Drago Guardian, this one also has some interesting differences. So you do have S130MB, which, I mean, sure. It's meant to be defense type. That's fine. No real thoughts on that. And to make this into a variant, they did end up changing the metal part of El Drago Destroy. The plastic and rubber is the exact same, so I guess that's fine, but yeah, this part is different. It's basically just more round, and it does have some impact on how the mode changes work, so these parts are pretty much covered by the rubber here. It becomes very round, and then I guess just shifting it over to the other way. It's still fairly round with these plastic parts here. I guess it has a bit more of counter defense going on, but nothing too crazy really. But yeah, these 2 variants, I mean, they at least did more than they really had to, but they kind of just exist, honestly. And for the most interesting bay of the set, we of course have Duo Uranus. And yeah, Duo Uranus, it is its own motif. It does reuse 230 WD, which I kind of wish they maybe would have done something different here, instead of just stealing Flame Bixus's combo, but whatever, I guess. Duo itself is actually kind of interesting, though. So it is a pretty solid stamina metal wheel, but if you shift it over, it kind of has a weight shift thing going on, and this weight shift is actually pretty notable, I would say. It's sort of a different thickness. You can kind of pair them. It's really awkward, but kind of interesting. I like how it works. It feels like a pretty distinct difference. I kind of wish we would have had something like this in Burst, or maybe even an X at some point, but yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, it's a very interesting set. I mean, again, you don't really have to do variants, but they did. That's cool. The main bay probably could have been a little better, but still, it's solid, but I do like the set overall, so that's cool. Now, Diablo Nemesis is pretty insane this bay. So the Diablo wheel itself is kind of just a bulky balance wheel, nothing really crazy about it typically, and with most tracks and bottoms, or even the 4 other 40 drives, it's just in this mode. And you also have Extreme Drive, or XD, and this thing. You have a couple modes here. You have the kind of attack-oriented mode, which is like this larger whole flat, and then you can shift that to kind of this weird, almost semi-flat type of thing here. Just these 2. Again, with most metal wheels, it's just this, so pretty basic. However, when you actually combine Diablo and XD together, there is a sort of secondary mode for both of them. So for this mode in particular, you actually take the core and then you flip the metal frame upside down like this, and then XD uses its size to actually slot in to make this like an actual thing. And here's kind of the special mode, which looks really weird, but it is cool because the underpart here of Diablo now actually just moves, which is really interesting by Metal Fight standards. And also, XD, you can probably see that it, yeah, the bottom part here, it does kind of just shift modes as that moves. So it kind of just goes out of control, doing its own thing, which is really cool. Definitely worthy of kind of that big December starter slot that it had. And again, just a very intricate design, honestly in general, but also especially for Metal Fight. Not as many crazy designs like this, so yeah, it is very, very cool that we had a design to this extent. And considering the motif is like a big combination of a bunch of other motifs, I think kind of going out of control is very fitting for it. Next we have Fusion Hades, and Fusion Hades, it's pretty nice. We have 8145, which, I mean, 8145 works well for defense, although this is kind of a balance type, so a little odd, but works. We also have Sharp Wide Defense, which, new part, I mean, you have kind of a Sharp with like the wide defense kind of part here acting as a guard. Why not? Don't have a huge issue with that, but of course Fusion is the star of the show here. And aside from Big Bang, is the only other wheel to actually be in 3 separate parts, which is really cool. And the PC frame here is more so just like a rubber frame, but that and the metal frame come together to sort of merge like that, and you can kind of choose how this applies to the core. You can kind of have this metal up mode, which more so just emphasizes metal contact with rubber just supporting underneath. Or you could flip it to where it is rubber on top, so you still have the metal, but yeah, rubber is a bit more prevalent in this way. I think it's pretty creative. I like that they introduced rubber on something other than El Drago. Maybe could have tried to go a little bit crazier here and have maybe some of the metal parts block off rubber or something. That could have been interesting, and vice versa, but for what we got, I think it still works really well and is very, very solid. So yeah, I do like Fusion Hades a lot. Definitely up there as one of my favorite 4D bays in terms of design, but conceptually it is still very cool as well. Christ Cygnus is also a really nice looking 4D bay, but in terms of what it does, this is an interesting one. Although it does just get 145 WD, which is really boring. They should have done like anything else here. I don't know what they were thinking, but the Christ wheel's at least cool. So it has the same kind of counter and defense roles that other defense metal wheels have had. However, this time it's a bit different. So in its kind of counter mode here, it just has this giant sort of circular position. It took forever to get, but yeah, just kind of like this. I mean, it works. Get these like notches here, I guess, but anyway. Its more interesting role is when it's in its normal defense form, because with this, you have this sort of 90-degree rotation here, which works fairly well, I think. Honestly, even if this was like the only mode, I think that'd still be fair, because having a moving metal part like this, I think is just really, really interesting. So yeah, another creative use of a core and metal frame. I think having multi-part metal wheels really does prove to be quite helpful. Now we have the special Koro Koro release with Omega Dragonis. This thing just has 85 XF, which I'm not going to be too strict here. It's a Koro Koro bay, like a special bay, but Omega does have a mode change. So basically it can be set to like this, where these parts just kind of come together and I guess are a larger contact point, and then these parts are just kind of offset as well on the side. It functions. And then you also can just kind of move it over to here, and now it's very much offset to where these parts are a little bit covered, but this part's kind of more exposed. It works. It's honestly not that interesting. It's kind of like Wing, where yes, it does obviously have an impact on how it performs. It's cool, but considering how interesting a lot of these later wheels have gotten, it's not that crazy. But again, it's just kind of a core release, a special release. I don't think it needs to get crazy. And honestly, the fact that they even gave it a mode change is still pretty nice. And lastly, we have Flash Sagittario. This thing has 230 WD again. Really wish they would change it up. This is a Sagittario, should have at least something new here. Give it like Claw 230, that'd be interesting. But at least the metal wheel does have some kind of mode change. And this one, it's fairly straightforward. It's an oval for attack, or you can move it over to its kind of more normal and expected stamina orientation, where these parts are out, and it's just kind of like 2 ovals. Which is pretty awkward actually, but sure, I guess. I don't know, I mean, the metal wheel's cool. It's just a really straightforward bay. It's an oval for attack, or just 2 ovals to make it fairly round for stamina. Though it's a little bit questionable, but yeah, it works. But anyway, that's basically everything I had for the video. I just wanted to go over every single 4D bay, talk about some of the more interesting parts, especially on the metal wheels. I figured that was the best way to just show how interesting 4D got, and that's what I like about 4D. It was interesting. I feel like metal is inherently restricted compared to plastic, which we see in Metal Fight, and honestly Beyblade X as well. But I feel like 4D was the one time where they really just overcame that entirely to make unique mode changes and just interesting design elements for these bays. And I kind of wanted to make this because I think Beyblade X should take some notes. Whatever the fourth line is, I think it should pull from 4D a bit, have more unique mode changes. There's a lot you could do with just having a couple metal parts and changing up the orientation. There's quite a bit there that can be done, so yeah. And I feel like how intricate they got and how creative they got with some things, it just makes the line really stand out. And while I do like Metal Fight Explosion a lot as well, I feel like the first season as well as Zero G do lack quite a bit. And between this and Explosion, I think 4D definitely does get over it because it's just a lot more intricate. I know competitive people might disagree. Again, I'm not a competitive person at all, so for me it's more about the design elements, and yeah, here they do a great job, and I just like these bays a lot. It's definitely the peak of Metal Fight for me personally. But yeah, that's really all for this video. So anyways, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.